I love the model or your thoughts around empathy increasing, and you see that, right? You see that
so.
in for example, folks who are going vegan, right? And it's a moral stance,
Right.
and now I eat meat, but I can totally respect that, right? And they are taking a moral stand on the cruelty that's been done to animals.
Right.
Example, climate change, another one, right?
Right.
It unites us.
Right.
It's a human problem. It's
Yes.
not a state problem. So then at the same time you sort of see this polarization, or maybe it's a U.S. thing, and with the right and the left, right? And it's sort of like one side versus the other. So in some ways we're seeing, empathy increasing, but in other ways we're seeing more sort of conflict. And sometimes I wonder if that's just a case of expanding and easier and faster communication, or I mean echo chambers and things like that. So just curious to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Again, these things are, as much as we can, I think, measure, quantify the, some variables about how much improvement has been going on in this world. It's sort of more difficult to quantify things like polarization, right? We can quantify whether there are more democracy or less democracy, more in the world, but that's a very crude instrument. Polarization is hard, and I understand what you're saying because I feel it too, but has it actually increased? Is it only because it might be a blimp on the road where suddenly it's more acceptable to say things that were not acceptable 5 years ago? Is it a trend, or the last gasp of a dying traditional world that's is about to
Just
pass
the last
away?
speed bump or the storm. Yes.
It's hard to say. Again, I think it's going back to one of the questions you've asked me about the millennials is how to get out of the funk. Is it's you should not, I think, look at the world from a very micro perspective. Next month, next year. Just look at the longer trend. Of course, the longer trend can also be scary because there's environment, but overall, there's great things happening, and I'm not a big fan of trying to analyze, current events. Maybe because of my age. Maybe because what I'm seeing today seems to have happened 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 30 years ago when I was a younger man. Pretty much the same thing, and I see this sort of repetition. So, that would be the first part of my answer. The second part about genetic modification and improvement. Well, there's this bioethicist. His name escapes me here, but this bioethicist who said, "How can we not offer people the chance of genetically improving themselves?"
Yeah.
Right. If your kid has, if you're, an unborn kid has some sort of grave, disease, and we can genetically modify its genome for him or her to not have that disease, how would you not do it? I'm not, again, worried about improvement because we've done this for thousands of years. Yes, you're right. It was the first time we're doing it biologically, but education is the best example of how we try to prove ourselves and separate ourselves from others. But the trend of education, with all the problems that we've mentioned before, the trend of education is not less access overall in the world. It's more access overall if you compare it to 50 years ago. It might be a bit different from 20 years ago, but compared to 50 years ago, it's more access.
That's true. And not just for the West, but for the entire
the whole world. Even for, you look at the level of education for young girls across the world, even those are improving. So, I think the more complex, the more technological, the more educated we become, the more compassionate we become.